I gained 40 pounds or 17 kilos in 14 months, and here's what I learned. After years of making weight at 62 kilos or about 135 pounds for MMA fights, I eventually gave up the sport, which is where I started getting into calisthenics more seriously after I always enjoyed doing some bodyweight training as part of MMA conditioning. As soon as I realized I wanted to try and go far with this, I decided just to try and stack on as much muscle as possible, as fast as possible, and from what I'd heard, bulking hard was going to be the way to do it. I kept the meals pretty clean, but I just started to stack the portions and stack the calories, and within about 5 months I'd already put on about 10 kilos or 25 pounds. I expected the bodyweight exercises to feel harder, which they did, but I remember being surprised at how much harder just stuff like going for a walk felt, how much heavier my steps felt, and even how much more restrictive breathing felt when I put on just that amount of weight that quick. The weight gain did eventually slow down, and it took about another 9 months or so to put on the rest of that 40 pounds total, and honestly I did definitely put on a lot of strength in that time, which I could feel not just in the weighted exercises that I was doing, and I was definitely getting stronger at objectively, but even in some of the bodyweight exercises that I was still performing pretty well at despite putting on all that extra mass. The movements were getting harder, but I was still able to bust out some sets of muscle ups, hold things like back levers, and I was still pushing some of the weighted calisthenics exercises too. But after 14 months, I was hitting a peak of about 203 pounds or just over 92 kilos, which at my height gets me into the obese category, which I thought was probably as good a target as any, and it was probably time to pull the pin. Over the next 5 months, I adjusted my diet and started to cut back down, which wasn't hard initially because I was already trying to force feed myself by the time I got to that weight, so dialing this back was actually a bit more of a relief at that point, and pretty quickly the calisthenics exercises started feeling way better. It was probably my favorite training period ever because I don't think I'll ever have a training period like this ever again where I feel like the progress is moving that quick, both as a combination of probably still getting a couple of newbie gains at that point, but more just due to the fact that every single week I was literally losing about a pound of body weight. I didn't have a weight target because I wasn't really sure how much muscle I was going to have actually gained in that time, but by the time I'd actually gotten to a point where I was happy with how I looked, I'd lost about 14 kilos total or about 30 pounds, and factoring in the lower body fat that I got to versus where I started, it probably equated to about 7 kilos or about 16 pounds of extra muscle mass, which I gained in just over a year and a half. This was a solid amount, but was it really worth it? Well, considering the fact I was probably still getting some newbie gains throughout that period, and considering the fact that at the end of that period I had to take a full 5 months to trim back down, where I was almost certainly gaining little to no muscle for that entire cutting period, I'd say it was actually pretty stupid. While I was definitely maximizing muscle gains during that bulking period, the extra gains that I would have got from being that aggressive with the amount of caloric intake I was on would have been easily offset, I think, by the fact that I did take that 5 months at the end, gaining almost no muscle mass, which is all time that I could have actually been making some gains if I'd gone for a more lean bulk. If I just tried to stay lean and gain that weight super duper slowly, making sure as much of it was muscle as possible, I think I would have likely ended up in much the same place after just having such a longer time to actually keep putting on that muscle tissue. And on top of that, I wouldn't have had to stress my body with all that sudden weight gain, I wouldn't have had to break the bank and try and force feed myself with all the food I was eating, and it probably would have been a much healthier process as a result. Mind you, the before and after photos and videos have made for some pretty good content. Since then, I've cycled between much smaller bulking and cutting phases, adding and losing anywhere up to around 5 kilos at a time, or about 12 pounds at most, and I've found this to work really well, but these days I've actually tried to stay closer to maintenance and just watch my weight go up super duper slowly, tracking my progress less through weight and more through strength, which at this point for me should be a much better indicator of whether or not I'm actually gaining muscle tissue, because I shouldn't have that many more skill gains to make with the exercises I've already been doing for years by now. When you're more experienced and have been training for longer anyway, your rate of muscle growth slows down dramatically, which means that the amount of calories you need to actually be in a surplus to make sure that you've got enough fuel around to fuel those gains only needs to be super duper slight, and the actual weight targets that you're going for are only going to be super minuscule even over pretty long periods of time. I've found that if I try and just aim for weight maintenance, I end up over a few months inevitably creeping up a little bit slowly anyway, just because it ends up being kind of hard to stay as lean as I want to stay all year round without those little accidental increases. But keeping a close eye on that and just making small corrections with 1 to 2 week micro cuts keeps me on track where my weight only goes upwards very slowly over a long period, and I know that any strength gains I'm making aren't just because my body weight's changing or because my technique's changing, but because I'm actually adding some muscle tissue with my effective training and diet at this point. This certainly isn't the only way to do it, and I break down different strategies that I've used before and that I use with clients in my full nutrition and fat loss guide that goes over all the different ways ways to try and structure your diet in a way that both suits you and your training and also gets the result you want without sacrificing muscle or strength gains. You can check out that guide as well as my other programs on my website.